Greetings. I'm Kathy Hollinsworth, and I'll be sharing today's devotional with you while our pastor Don Macon is on vacation this week and next week. I'd like to read an excerpt from a book by Frederick Buechner, a 94-year-old Presbyterian minister and theologian who's written over 30 books, from sermons to fiction. This excerpt is from a book called Peculiar Treasures, in which he profiles 125 Bible characters in ways that show us that they are just as human as you and I are. This excerpt is about the Apostle Peter. Everybody knows Peter started out as a fisherman. He lived with his wife in Capernaum, where they shared a house with his mother-in-law and his brother Andrew. He and Andrew had their own boat and were in business with a couple of partners named James and John, Zebedee's sons. The first time Jesus laid eyes on him, he took one good look and said, "So you're Simon, the son of John," and then said that from then on he'd call him Cephas, which is Aramaic for Peter, which is Greek for rock. A rock isn't the prettiest thing in creation or the fanciest or the smartest, and if it gets rolling in the wrong direction, watch out. But there's no nonsense about a rock, and once it settles down, it's pretty much there to stay. There's not a lot you can do to change a rock or crack it or get under its skin, and you can depend on it about as much as you can depend on anything. So Jesus called Peter the rock, and it stuck with him the rest of his life. He could stop fishing for fish, Jesus told him. He had been promoted. From there on out, people were to be his business. Now he could start fishing for people. There was a lot of talk going around about who Jesus was and who he wasn't, and Jesus himself seemed just as glad to steer clear of the subject. Then one day he brought it up himself, and the disciples batted it around for a while. There were some people who said he was John the Baptist come back from the grave, they told him, or maybe Elijah or Jeremiah or some other prophet who thought he'd see what he could do a second time around. There were all kinds of half-baked theories, they said. Then Jesus put it to them straight. Who do you say that I am? Nobody wanted to stick his neck out, and the silence was deafening till Peter broke it or till it washed up against the rock. You're the Christ, he said, the Son of the living God. It took a lot of guts to say that, and Jesus knew it did. If it was true, it was enough to blow the lid off everything. If it wasn't true, you could get yourself stoned to death as a blasphemer for just thinking it. But Peter said it anyway, and Jesus made up for him the only beatitude he ever made up for a single individual, and said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," which means Simon, son of John, and seems to have been what he always called Peter when he really meant business. Then he went back to Peter the rock again and told him that he was the rock he wanted to build his church on, and that as soon as he got to heaven, he was to be the one to decide who else got in. "I will give you the keys of the kingdom," Jesus said. It was another promotion. But if Peter was the only one Jesus ever gave a beatitude of his own to, he was also the only one he ever gave heck to, at least in quite such a different way. It happened not long afterward. Jesus was saying that to be the Christ, the Son of the living God, wasn't going to be a bed of roses all the way, and the time wasn't far off when he, Jesus, would suffer the tortures of the damned in Jerusalem and be killed. Peter couldn't take it. "God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen," he said, and that's when Jesus lit into him. "Get behind me, Satan," he said, because the rock that Peter was at that point was blocking the grim road that Jesus knew he had to take, whether he or Peter or anybody else wanted it that way or not, because God wanted it that way, and that was that. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." It wasn't the last time Peter said the wrong thing either, or asked the wrong question, or got the wrong point, or at least failed to do the thing that was right. The day he saw Jesus walking on the water and tried to walk out to him himself, for instance. He was just about to go under for the third time, because rocks have never been much good at floating, when Jesus came to the rescue. And once when Jesus was talking about forgiveness, Peter asked, "How many times are you supposed to forgive any one person? 7 times maybe?" And Jesus turned on him and said that after you'd forgiven them 70 times 7, you were just starting to get warmed up. Another time, Jesus was talking about heaven, and Peter wanted to know what sort of special deal people like himself got, people who had left home and given everything up on the way he'd given everything up to follow Jesus. And Jesus took it easy on him that time, because a rock can't help being a little thick sometimes, and said he'd get plenty, and so would everybody else. And then there were the things he did or failed to do, those final miserable days just before the end. At their Last Supper, when Jesus started to wash the disciples' feet, it was Peter who protested. "You wash my feet?" And when Jesus explained that it showed how they were all part of each other and servants together, Peter said, "Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and my head." At that same sad meal, Jesus said he would have to be going soon, and because Peter didn't get what he meant or couldn't face it, he asked about it. And Jesus explained what he meant was that he was going where nobody on earth could follow him. Peter finally got the point then and asked why he couldn't follow. "I'll lay down my life for you," he said. And then Jesus said to him the hardest thing Peter had ever heard him say. "Listen," Jesus said, "the cock won't crow until you've betrayed me 3 times. And that's the way it was, of course. Peter sitting out there in the high priest's courtyard, keeping warm by the fire, while inside the ghastly interrogation was in process, and then the girl coming up to ask him 3 times if he wasn't one of them, and his replying each time that he didn't know what in God's name she was talking about. And then the old cock's wattles trembling scarlet as up over the horizon it squawked the rising sun, and the tears running down Peter's face like rain down a rock. According to Paul, the first person Jesus came back to see after Easter morning was Peter. What he said and what Peter said, nobody will ever know, and maybe that's just as well. Their last conversation on this earth, however, is reported in the Gospel of John. It was on the beach at daybreak. Some of the other disciples were there, and Jesus cooked them breakfast. When it was over, he said to Peter, only again he called him Simon, son of John, because if ever he meant business, this was it. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter said he did. Then Jesus asked the same question a second time, and then a third time, and each time Peter said he loved him. 3 times in all, to make up for the other times. Then Jesus said, "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep." And you get the feeling that this time Peter didn't miss the point. From fisher of fish to fisher of people to keeper of the keys to shepherd. It was the Rock's final promotion, and from that day forward, he never let the head office down again. I hope you enjoyed Buechner's down-to-earth portrayal of Peter. Now, as we close, please join me as we share a prayer to welcome the changing of the year. O God of creation, you have blessed us with the changing of the seasons. As we welcome the autumn months, may the earlier setting of the sun remind us to take time to rest. May the brilliant colors of the leaves remind us of the wonder of your creation. May the steam of our breath in the cool air remind us that it is you who give us the breath of life. May the harvest from the fields remind us of the abundance we have been given and bounty we are to share with others. May the dying of summer's spirit remind us of your great promise that death is temporary and life is eternal. We praise you for your goodness forever and ever. Amen. Stay safe and well, and may the Lord be with you until we meet again.